Good evening. Good evening. My name is Mohammed Faridi, and I'm the president of the New York City Bar Association. My job tonight is very simple relative to the job that John has. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome you all to the New York City Bar Association, to the Debevoise Plimpton and Barbara Paul Robinson series, tonight featuring FBI Director Christopher Wray. This series of talks, which is very generously funded by Debevoise and by Barbara, focuses on leaders in the law who join us to share their life stories, to inspire others in the profession. When she became the president of the bar back in 1994, long overdue and about 124 years after the association's founding, Barbara inspired countless women in the law and beyond. And she, along with Conrad Harper, who became our first Black African-American president, cleared the way for so many others to follow their footsteps. Roger Maldonado, who became our president a few years ago, followed by Sheila Boston, our first Black president of the Bar Association, female Black president of the bar. My thanks as well to the distinguished predecessors in this office, John Kiernan, who served so effectively as the bar president from 2016 to 2018, and who seems to have chaired almost the board of every single public interest organization in New York City, and in his spare time also serving as the mayor of Pelham Manor in Westchester. Currently working as a mediator and arbitrator, John is a retired partner and is currently off counsel at Debevoise. And finally, our thanks to FBI Director Christopher Wray for making time in his extraordinarily busy schedule to participate in this very special event tonight. And with that, I am pleased to turn it over to John.
Many thanks, Mohammed. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of the Barbara Paul Robinson Debevoise and Plimpton Speaker Series, originated by my partner and friend, Barbara Robinson. Many thanks to Barbara for conceiving and sponsoring these events, to Debevoise for providing sponsorship support, and to the City Bar for hosting them. Let me also extend the warmest welcome to members of the Wray family tonight, including Director Wray's parents, Cecil Wray, my retired partner, and his wife Gilda, Director Wray's wife Helen, and his daughter Christine? Caroline, I'm sorry, my mistake. So this series has been built around conversations with lawyers of extraordinary accomplishment, extracting the stories of how they got there, what they learned along the way that was important to their achievements and their sense of themselves as lawyers and people, how their records of service have or have not satisfied their ambitions, and what challenges they have confronted in seeking to function as the professionals they were determined to be. The simple but important idea has been that we all have something to learn from people like these. It's a pleasure to have this evening a fireside armchair conversation without fire or armchair in your presence with the renowned director of the US FBI, Christopher Wray. You all know who he is, the leader of our country's legendary and preeminent investigative organism, who has served in the past 7 years under a Republican and then a Democratic presidential administration. But let me just provide a few of the background particulars on him for context. Director Wray graduated from Yale College in 1989 and Yale Law School in 1992, clerked for Judge Michael Luttig in the Fourth Circuit for a year, and then began practicing as an associate at King & Spalding in Atlanta. After 4 years there, including work under former Attorney General Griffin Bell. In 1997, he became an assistant US attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. He spent the next 4 years prosecuting a wide variety of crimes, including public corruption, gun trafficking, drug offenses, and financial fraud, cutting his teeth on many of the big areas of federal criminal law. In the summer of 2001, he moved to Washington to join the Justice Department as Associate Deputy Attorney General during a period where the world of federal investigations was entering a new era, and only a few weeks before 9/11 and a few months before Enron put particular punctuation marks around the notion of a new era of investigations. He then earned himself rapidly a series of promotions. He was elevated to Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General in 2002, and in 2003, President Bush nominated him, and he was confirmed as Assistant Attorney General, leading the Criminal Division of the Justice Department. He also had responsibility for the Counterterrorism Division of the Counterintelligence and Export Control Section, and oversaw the Enron Task Force. Director Wray left the Department of Justice in 2005 and rejoined King & Spalding, where over the next 12 years, he led a wide variety of large-scale investigations and complex disputes in the private sector. In 2017, President Trump appointed him to serve as director of the FBI, and he's continued in that role under President Biden. So those are the biographical particulars, and of course the narrative always has more humanity in it. So let me begin Director Wray, by asking you an objectionable compound question, which should be simple because it'll be such a narrow question. What was your plan when you started working at King & Spalding, and how did you get from there to here?
Well, I'm used to dealing with difficult questions, and not always because they're compound questions, but when I started at King & Spalding, I already kind of had a thought that I wanted to be a prosecutor. I had, as a summer intern in college, happened to work in a DA's office in their family crimes unit, where they were dealing with, of course, child abuse and elder abuse cases, and it was very eye-opening to me about the impact that prosecutors and law enforcement can have on families. And so it kind of got me thinking, and then as I started talking to more and more people, I kept finding former prosecutors in private practice who spoke a lot more fondly and almost wistfully about their days as a prosecutor than they did about their time in private practice. And I thought there's something going on here. And so I continued to explore it, and eventually then wanted to go be an assistant U.S. attorney. And I wouldn't say there was any kind of single light bulb moment. I think the beauty of public service is that it's just a series of light bulb moments where you keep getting reaffirmed about the value of being able to have an impact on others, on serving others. I think about cases that I had when I was an assistant U.S. attorney. I had a case, I remember, with a guy who, in a white-collar case of all things, who decided to take out a hit on a young woman who he considered the star witness, who also happened to be the mother of his 7-year-old boy. And fortunately, the hitman got cold feet, flipped, worked with us. We were able to charge the guy with that. And if there was anything more devious than the plot itself, it was that he intended for it to look like the mom, the woman, had essentially thrown up her hands and just found it too hard to be the kid's mother, and it just fled. So this 7-year-old boy would not only have lost his mother, but would have spent the rest of his life thinking that the reason he lost her was because she just gave up on him. Fast forward, we go through the trial, we win, he gets sentenced for the rest of his life, and I'll never forget being in the courtroom and having this young woman who couldn't have been 105 pounds running around hugging all the agents and me, and she kept sort of shuddering and saying the same thing over and over again, "Thank you for saving my life." And my first reaction was, well, the agents did that, you know, these are gun toters, yeah, they saved her life. But she was saying it to me too as a prosecutor, and I sort of thought, I actually did have a role in saving her life. And I can think of sort of countless stories like that, and that's sort of the beauty of public service, is the ability to have such a profound impact on a single person, in this case, not just that woman, but her 7-year-old who, instead of growing up an orphan, grew up with his mother. And it's a pretty neat feeling. And I think, you know, that's one of the things that is so constantly reaffirming and rewarding about public service. And when I talk to people now in my current job, I find that everybody in public service has those light bulb moments. I often think about one when our daughter Caroline was a little girl, and she was about 5 years old, and it was Dad's Day at her nursery school. And as part of Dad's Day, all the teachers had asked all little boys and girls a series of questions about their fathers, and then memorialized the answers down on these construction paper teddy bears. And one of the questions, of course, is, what does your dad do at work? So anyway, Dad's Day arrives, and I and all the other fathers are standing there in the classroom staring up at this bulletin board that's like a sea of teddy bears. And I'm staring up at the bulletin board, and this other dad is standing next to me, and he keeps looking over at me, and so I kind of look over at him, and he said, "Hey man, you mind if I ask what you do for a living?" And this is when I was a prosecutor. And so I looked back at my daughter's teddy bear, and it said, "My daddy and his friends put bad guys in jail and help keep us all safe." Now, I'm a normal, red-blooded American male, so of course I have to look at his teddy bear. His teddy bear said, "My daddy talks on the phone all day, so Mommy and I can buy nice stuff." And even for me, a little slow on the uptake, you know, that was one of those light bulb moments. If you want to do something for a living that even a 5-year-old little girl can appreciate as meaningful and impactful, that's what you get in this line of work.
And did you find when you were at AUS that this focus on thinking about the victims and thinking about providing safety was a driver that sort of was what got you up in the morning to think about how to put a particular bad guy in jail? Absolutely,
and it's sort of once you wake up to that, that's one of those things. That's a kind of fulfillment that never gets old. It never, every other kind of fulfillment in life has a diminishing or plateauing kind of return, but serving others in that way and making that kind of difference never gets old. And I see it now with our folks when they're retiring after an entire career. They still have the same energy and love of mission on their last day that they did on their first day. And not very many jobs people can say that. We had a situation where in one of our small offices in Ohio, that was plagued with gang violence, that particular community, and we did, as we do so often, almost every day, a big sweep, lots of arrests, working with our state and local counterparts, arrested tens and tens of gang members, and the office there got this note from a mom in that community on behalf of her little girl, and the note explained that her daughter, who was maybe 8 years old or something, for years had been afraid to sleep on top of her bed, so she slept under her bed because she was so terrified by all the gang violence in her neighborhood. And after this sweep, for the first time, she felt comfortable sleeping in her own bed, and she insisted that her mom write this note to our Cleveland field office, thanking them for, essentially making that difference for her. And I can tell you, everybody in that office got a real kick out of it, because that's why we do what we do. So now you've spent about 16 years of your career in private practice at King & Spalding. Was that part of the plan, or was the bouncing back and forth something that sort of happened without being planned particularly? I mean, I enjoyed my time in private practice a lot. I felt like I learned a lot. I worked with some outstanding lawyers. You mentioned, Griffin Bell, Larry Thompson, the former Deputy Attorney General, is one of my mentors. And I certainly learned a lot about rigor, about the kind of perfectionism that's required to tackle hard problems. And I found it very fulfilling. And obviously there were monetary benefits from time in private practice. But I still, as much as I enjoyed it, and I loved my firm, I still felt that something was missing. And so when this opportunity kind of came pretty much out of nowhere, we had to have some hard conversations as a family, but it was something that I didn't feel like I could turn down.
Sure. External observers of people who act both as prosecutors and as representatives, mostly of the defense in private practice, wonder how that can be done. To what extent did it affect your work in one or the other of the roles that you'd worked in the other?
I guess I have a different view on that than those who wonder how it could be done. In my view, all of us are more effective the more roles we've had, the more seats we've sat in. You understand better the mindset of the people across the table from you, and that I think that just inevitably makes you more effective. People talk a lot about the value that former prosecutors bring on the defense side. I actually also found that on the beginning stage of my career, having been a defense attorney before I became a prosecutor, that it gave me a huge advantage as a prosecutor to having been a former defense attorney. And now, in this job, kind of at a different level, the FBI is so, on the one hand, it's a $10 to $11 billion organization with 38,000 employees and offices all over the world. And so having been in leadership at a global law firm, working with huge companies, dealing with boards, the leadership lessons that come from the private sector have been useful to me in this role. But also, so much of the FBI's mission in today's world with cyber, economic espionage, et cetera, requires a renewed, invigorated sense of private sector partnership. And so the ability to relate to the private sector has been a big advantage for me in the way I think this job has to get done now.
So you moved from the AUSA world to a high level as associate deputy in Maine Justice in the summer of 2001, which is a remarkable time to make such a move. Can you comment on kind of how the world existed for you when you got there, and how it changed in the period while you were there in the next 4 years?
Yeah, it's interesting. I started in, I think, late May of 2001, and while I have vague memories of the summer of 2001 being incredibly busy and sort of a blistering pace, I'm hard-pressed to remember what it was I was doing on September 10th and September 9th and September 8th. I can tell you exactly what I was doing on September 11th, which was I was in FBI headquarters pretty much all day, pretty much all night, and most of the days and nights after that. Our whole world changed. Everybody's whole world changed, but including the way the FBI and the Justice Department approach their mission changed pretty fundamentally. And that's something I think about a lot, and it was a big motivation for me in coming back into service now, was work on the 9/11 response. Part of my job when I was Assistant Attorney General was to oversee some of the prosecutions that related to 9/11 and certainly to the war on terror. And I'm very proud of the way our folks engaged with the victims, the 3,000 victims of 9/11. And I got to spend time with them. And when you do that, you have, I think, an appreciation of what's at stake in a way that it's one thing to understand it up here. I think it's another thing to understand it, in here, in your heart. And when you engage with the victims, you get that. I mean, I remember, for example, we did this when I was Assistant Attorney General. I brought the agents and the prosecutors together, and we had all the families in a room, you know, maybe twice this size. It was closed off, and we had the teams, and I spoke to all the families for a while, and then we had some people going through each one of the 4 flights and talking through what we knew had happened, you know, minute by minute, second by second. And then the families were able to ask questions. And I'll never forget this one gentleman, very distinguished, whose daughter had been killed on one of the flights. And again, this is now, you know, maybe 2 years after the attacks. And so he gets up, they hand him the microphone to ask his question, and he starts to ask his question, and the grief just overpowered him. And he literally, his knees just buckled and he collapsed to the floor. This was not a guy in poor health or anything else, but just, you know, people talk about knee buckling grief, and I got to see knee buckling grief literally, and it kind of was a pretty powerful reminder of, you know, what happened to all those families. I think about the guy, I'll never forget this one guy whose wife, I think, was on the plane that went into the Pentagon. He worked some kind of night job, so he's at home asleep when the plane is going down, and his wife tried to call him from the plane, like so many of the passengers did as the plane was going down, trying to call their loved ones. She gets his voicemail because he's asleep, leaves a message saying goodbye. She tries again maybe 10 seconds later, and that time he sort of comes out of his fog, he answers the phone, they get to exchange their tearful goodbyes, and then, you know, he goes off with family, you know, attends to the funeral. He's gone from his home for several days after that. He comes back to his house 5, 6 days, 7 days after 9/11, walks in, and it says he has messages. And so he plays the messages, and the first message he hears is that message that his wife left him saying goodbye. And, you know, I've heard that message. I've always wondered, you know, what would going through his mind, you know, at that moment to, you know, the sort of momentary elation of hearing his wife's voice again, followed by the instant realization that he'll never hear it again. And so every one of those 3,000 people has a story like that. And that, I think, for those of us in my line of work, it gives you a feeling of needing to be on the balls of your feet and not to be complacent, and a drive. And I think one of the things that was very much on my mind now coming back into service in this job is that I'm realizing that we've gone from an organization where everybody remembers what they were doing at the FBI on 9/11 to an organization that recruited a lot of people who were inspired to come into service because of 9/11, to an organization full of people more and more who were little kids or maybe not even born on 9/11, so they've heard about it. And so one of the things I started thinking early on in my tenure as FBI director was, how can I get our current workforce to have that same emotional dedication to the mission, appreciation for what's at stake, when they won't, of course, have lived through and experienced engagement with the families and so forth. So I actually directed that all Quantico classes, and we have about 15 of them a year, they all go to the 9/11 Memorial Museum here in New York, which if you haven't been, I urge you to do it, but it's a very powerful exhibit, and it allows people to experience just a little bit of kind of why we do what we do. And I went, the very first time a class went, I tagged along as FBI director, tried to sort of stay a little bit in the background, and I could see, I was kind of watching them while they were watching the exhibit, and it was fascinating to see the sort of aha moments, you know, in different agents' eyes as they were kind of going through the exhibit, and I thought that's what I'm trying to get.
It sounds as though the humanity of public service is a really important element of the culture that you're trying to build into the places that you've been involved in law.
We ask everybody at Quantico, what is your why? And everybody has different ways of answering it, but I think the vast majority of them, their why is just what you're saying, and it's something about wanting to serve others and protect others.
So going back to your time as assistant AG, maybe it was a first salvo in this cultural education effort, but you testified at your confirmation hearing for FBI director that when you were assistant AG, you insisted on spending time in person with every single new lawyer who came into the office, which sounds like a daunting challenge, but what was your thinking?
Yeah, well, my staff thought my staff was saying, what are you thinking by trying to do that? But my mindset was, if I can spend 10, 15 minutes at the outside with each new hire, I'm getting them right at the moment where they're paying the most attention to what I have to say, because they know, like, this is the last stop before I get the job. And so I thought, I gotta seize that window of time to be able to talk to them a little bit. I used it to kind of make certain points, one of them being some of what we're talking about right now. You're about to take on a job where you will have impact on people that it's easy to lose sight of, and you need to conduct yourself in a way where those people will remember that impact in the most positive way possible. And so whether that's the victims, whether that's witnesses, whether that's your opponent, whether that's jurors. Sometimes I would use the example, you know, when you're running behind, don't cut off the guy in front of you coming into the court parking lot, because you could turn out to be that's one of your jurors. And you know, they'll remember that stuff. And I said, you will find times when you will bump into somebody years later who will say to you, oh, I remember you were the prosecutor in the such and such case. I remember when you blank. And I would say, you really want to make sure that what comes in that blank is a positive memory, because they'll remember it almost better than you will, because they're not, unlike us, they're not dealing with the criminal justice system 7 days a week. So for them, that one experience with the criminal justice system, in whatever role they're playing, is gonna be, you know, short of like the birth of their child, their wedding day, you know, something like that, is gonna be one of the most memorable moments in their life. Sometimes, some ways good, some ways bad, and you wanna make sure you're part of the good memory and not part of the bad memory. So that was something along those lines.
So now as you're dealing with the transformative effect of 9/11 as Assistant Attorney General and your other roles in the Department of Justice, in the meantime, only a few months after 9/11, Enron collapses. In the next 6 months, you have Sarbanes-Oxley and WorldCom, and a transformation of financial fraud in the national consciousness and in law enforcement. And then you have cyber encroaching in ways that it never has before. Did it feel like it was kind of a whirlwind of new stuff adding to the old-fashioned crimes that had been there all along?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of tempted to, you get to a point where sometimes you want to answer the phone, now what? I mean, it definitely, I can remember days where I would have like 4 different meetings running at one time in 4 different conference rooms, and I'd be bopping back and forth between them and having to kind of change my mindset from a terrorism investigation in Portland or something over to some giant corporate fraud case, over to some cyber intrusion by the Russians or whatever it happened to be. And you're having to keep adjusting your brain. It's you know, it's exhilarating but exhausting at the same time.
So let's skip over that 12 years between 2005 and 17, where you were out there at King & Spalding as a private practitioner, and jump to your becoming the director of the FBI in 2017. That was also a time of upheaval And again, in your confirmation hearing, you made a striking statement. You said the job of FBI director is not for the faint of heart. And Senator, I am not faint of heart. What would you have in mind when you were thinking about making that statement?
Well, I mean, because of the things I've done in my career, I've had an opportunity to get a pretty close view of what the role of an FBI director is like. During those years post 9/11, I was meeting with the Attorney General and the FBI director every morning at, dark something, day after day after day, and spending a lot of time engaging with the Bureau. So I had a pretty good appreciation for, I guess I could say, how hard the job is. I mean, we do hard. They don't give us the easy stuff, and the FBI director has to make really hard decisions that often are really unpopular and really unwelcome somewhere. And so you have to be prepared for that. I think that was kind of the point I was trying to make.
You described the FBI as an institution that is one part law enforcement and another part intelligence, intelligence being, I guess, in some ways, the act of predicting the law enforcement matters of tomorrow and preventing them from happening. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, those two identities and how they interact?
Well, I think one of the great strengths of our system is the way the FBI is constructed as both law enforcement and an intelligence agency. I think law enforcement is more effective if it's informed by strong intelligence analysis. I think intelligence analysis is more useful if it takes into account how that information is going to be used by law enforcement or by other consumers. And when I compare our system to a lot of my friends who represent comparable agencies in other countries, we have a huge competitive advantage. You could just take in the current environment, we see more and more national security threats and traditional criminal threats blending in a way that it means that if you had those areas of emphasis decoupled, the risk of, to put it mildly, left-hand, right-hand problems is very acute, and we avoid that. And I often hear from my counterparts how much they wish they had their system like ours.
So you've been an advocate for the taking down of walls between agencies.
I think the key to being ahead of the threat, our strategy that I rolled out for the Bureau has as its vision statement, ahead of the threat. And so to be ahead of the threat, we need to be sharing information with those who can use it to be ahead of the threat. And it's sort of, in some ways, it's almost that simple, but of course it's incredibly complicated to execute.
So in the era where you have a 9/11 that went beyond the imagination of anyone who thought the worst of anybody, and new cyber techniques every day for thinking about ways that the entire American financial infrastructure or governmental infrastructure or logistical infrastructure could get undermined by cyber threats. And the use by foreign governments of new methods of communication to influence thinking, not in Americans' interests. How do you stay ahead of the imaginations of all the bad guys? And what kind of sort of temperaments and minds do you look for in the people whose job it is to imagine the worst in the future and prepare and prevent?
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is, and I say this only partly flippantly, everywhere I turn, somebody has a really good idea for something the FBI needs to be doing more of. I have not yet found anybody with any responsible ideas of what it is the FBI can start doing less of. If you happen to meet that person, my staff would be happy to take their contact information, but and so for me, it's about how do I make us more effective across a range of threats in an almost impossible landscape. And to me, the secret to that is partnerships and intelligence. Partnerships, because if we leverage more and more closely our partnerships with the rest of the intelligence community, all of our law enforcement partners, our foreign partners, private sector partners, community partners, the goal of effective partnership is to take our two, the FBI's two, plus somebody else's two, and have it equal not 4, but 5, or 6, or 7, and to really make us, the whole being greater, more effective than the sum of the parts. That's the key to good partnerships, and partnerships in today's FBI are better by a country mile than they were in earlier stages in my career. The intelligence piece of it is how can we make all those things be more effective? How can we prioritize and maximize impact and build resilience and share information so, say, companies, for example, can harden their networks and make them less vulnerable, how neighborhoods can prioritize certain places to deal with gang violence, how we can identify certain trafficking routes for fentanyl to make sure we seize it before it's distributed all over the country. So things like that. Now, you mentioned sort of the worst of humanity. I get asked a lot in this job, as you might imagine, how you say, well, it must be so hard. You see the worst of humanity, you see the darkest of humanity, and that is true. But I also see the best of humanity, and what I mean by that is the kind of people we have at the FBI, and that I'm constantly struck by the character, the grit, the resilience, the talent, the character of our workforce. I mean, I could give countless examples. I think about the Charlotte agent who, on his way home from work, found some woman in a car, trapped in a car that was on fire, and risking his own life, physically manages to drag her out of the car, extinguish the blaze in her clothes, render first aid, save her life. I think about the Chicago agent who, following a fugitive into a farmhouse in southern Illinois, has his entire right arm shot up by an AR-15, survives, retrains himself to shoot left-handed, requalifies for SWAT left-handed, and then when an ATF agent, a young ATF agent in the same community was shot in the face, this guy took it upon himself to mentor the young ATF agent about how, life will go on, you can overcome this, et cetera, see what happened to me. I think about the Atlanta agent who stumbles across a gang fugitive, like in a parking lot, chases the guy down, the guy hops in the car, the agent follows him, gets stuck in the car door, the bad guy drives out onto the highway, dragging our agent, bouncing along the highway. The agent breaks his arm, his leg, his pelvis, manages to get his gun off, stops the car, arrests the bad guy. I think about the Portland agent who was out for a morning run, and he's standing on the sort of the subway or the rapid transit tracks, and there's a mentally ill woman down in the tracks, and she's like right there, right in the middle of the track. He climbs down into the tracks, tries to help get her out of the tracks. Because she's impaired, she starts clawing at him and biting him and scratching and everything else, but he manages to get her out of the tracks. I forgot to mention, there's a train coming. These are things that happen on an almost weekly basis. I was just in the Dakotas, and I met an agent who we had sent out to work Indian country, which is, by the way, one of the hardest assignments you can do in the FBI. And typically, if you go do it, you're supposed to do 3 years, and then you can go do whatever you want in the Bureau pretty much afterwards. She's been there for 9, and I found out that she just recently adopted 3 kids, a 4-, 5-, and 6-year-old, from the reservation, 2 of whom were victims of a pretty horrific crime in that reservation. There's no part of our job description that requires that female agent to adopt those 3 kids, but that's the that's the kind of heart and character I see every day, and it's astonishing.
So how that, it's inspiring to listen to your comments. It's clear that your contributions as a culture carrier are an important component of your leadership of the FBI. How do you instill that culture? How do you maintain that and celebrate that culture? I'm sure it's not different from the cultures of other FBIs at various times, but it's obviously a priority for you. And what are you most proud of doing in your efforts to sustain that important culture?
I mean, I think, well, part of it is being consistent. My family would say infuriatingly consistent, but to the point of being boring. But, my focus when I started, given that I started this job in a time of, I think it's fair to say, all sorts of turmoil, chaos, drama, part of my focus was to try to get us back to making sure we were focused on what really mattered, to tune out the noise, to bring a level of calm, stability, dare I say it, even normalcy in an environment and a society where many days none of those things seem true. I remember when I was thinking about taking this job on, some retired agents who I'd worked with earlier in my career were calling me, telling me I needed to take this on. And I said, guys, are you sure? I mean, I'm pretty boring. And one of them said, believe me, we could use a little boring right now. And so I said, well, then I'm your man. I can suck drama out of anything. So, part of it is trying to focus on what really matters. And what really matters is the work, the people we do the work with, and the people we do the work for. And 99% of everything else, in my view, is noise. And so I'm proud of the way we've sort of redoubled our focus on what really matters. And I think that's reflected in the strategy we've pursued and in my kind of relentless messaging on the topic. One component of your work, one that unsurprisingly gets a lot of public attention, and one in which you have adhered to sort of your repeatedly to your basic firm principles about how you should be an investigator at the FBI, relates to the FBI's investigations of political figures or of activities about which political figures have enormous interest. Can you comment generally on the kinds of challenges those investigations pose? So without commenting on any particular investigation or even hinting at one, I think what I would say is I view our role as to follow the facts wherever they lead, to whomever they lead, no matter who likes it. And I add that last part because if there's one thing that's become painfully clear to me in this role, in this time in our country's history, is that there's always somebody who really doesn't like it. And so I think what I find is that people are all for independence and objectivity until it leads to the result they don't like. But that's not how independence and objectivity work. And so my message to our people has been, we're gonna have to do the work in the right way. We can't worry too much about the outcome and who's gonna be happy or unhappy with the outcome, because I guarantee you there's always gonna be somebody unhappy with everything we do. And that is just worrying too much about that pretty quickly becomes finger to the wind. And that pretty quickly becomes the ends justify the means. And if there's one thing an organization as powerful as the FBI can never be, it's an organization for whom the ends justify the means. We have to be an organization where our means, the process, the way we do the work, justifies the end. So that when we get to the end, and like if it's a criminal case, for example, whether somebody gets charged or not, or whether it's an intelligence assessment that comes down one way versus another way, and whoever it is who doesn't like it is attacking it, we need to be in a position where we can say, I get it, you don't like where we came out, but you can't really challenge the way we got there. And I think if we do that, I'm not saying we won't have to deal with all kinds of slings and arrows in the short run, but in the long run, I think that's what's in the best interest of not only the Bureau, but of the country. And when I go around the world, as I do a lot, meeting with my counterparts from other countries, there are very few countries that have organizations like the FBI that will objectively and rigorously and without fear or favor or partisanship investigate public corruption.
Now you, obviously, you've served under both a Republican and a Democratic president, which is a great indicator of nonpartisanship, but how do you and your colleagues steel yourselves against the noise of efforts to influence when the noise comes from such powerful sources?
Well, some of it's what we've just been talking about. It's, can you be sure that you did the work in the right way? I'm not saying the FBI is infallible. We're 116 years old. We've got tens of thousands of employees. We've made mistakes over the years, some real doozies, in fact. But to me, when we're at our best, and I would stack our track record overall, our body of work against anybody's, it's when we make sure that we do the work with the right kind of objectivity and rigor, adherence to the law, following the facts, and not getting too hung up on the outcome. That's point one. And then the second, when it comes to the noise, I'm reminded, there's a great quote from the college basketball coach, John Wooden, from UCLA. I'm not gonna get it exactly right, but I'm close. It's something like, be far more concerned about your character than your reputation, because your character is who you actually are. Your reputation is just what people think you are. And you can control your character. You can't always control what people think. And so trying to get people to stay focused on, again, the work, the people we do the work with, the people we do the work for, and getting that right, and having confidence that when all is said and done, in the long run, we'll be fine.
You were asked back at your confirmation hearing if there could be circumstances where you might conclude that you could not compromise on a position that differed from the position of the Department of Justice or the White House, and you said yes. Again, without getting into particulars, have you thought through in your mind kind of where the line is and where demands from other sources could lead you to an impasse that could even lead to something like resignation?
Well, again, without reference to any specific thing, I have firmly been of the view, and I've articulated all the way back, I guess, even to my confirmation hearing, so before I even started in the job, that I think there's only one way to do this job, which is to be able to follow the law and the facts wherever they lead, no matter who likes it. And that last part is important because it's inevitable that there are gonna be things that we do that are unwelcome, unpopular, that make people unhappy. That's just comes with the territory. And if I'm put in a position where I have to compromise on those things, I would not be willing to do that. So I have insisted that that's how we approach the job, and I expect that I will continue to insist that.
So you've gone through a lot of rigorous tests in developing your deserved reputation for integrity and character. What advice do you have to for lawyers who aspire to attach that kind of integrity to their professional careers?
I mean, I think a lot of it, frankly, is things we learn as kids, like the golden rule. Treat everybody else the way you would want to be treated if the roles were reversed. Call balls and strikes. Those are the kinds of things that I think stand you in good stead your whole career. I know that when I was getting vetted for this position, I felt comfortable telling all the various people digging deep into my background I said, I don't care who you talk to, you can go ask anybody I had a case against or with, and I'm confident in what they'll say. because I tried to approach dealing with my adversaries in a way that was professional and respectful. And I thought, there's a lesson here, because you can't go back and do it over again from earlier in your career and wish you had treated certain people with more respect and professionalism, because now it really matters. So if you just treat everybody with decency and respect, it's actually much simpler, and in the long run, it pays off. And I think the balls and strikes point is equally important. Integrity begets credibility, credibility begets trust, trust begets success.
That's a great lineage. It seems funny to ask about this, but could you talk for a minute about the importance to you of telling the truth, which is something that is maybe less of an automatic reflex value in the legal profession today than it has been at other times, and of respect for the rule of law?
Well, two different but related concepts, telling the truth and rule of law. Telling the truth is similar to what I was just saying, I think, which is just, if you are consistent in telling the truth, the first thing is it's a lot less complicated, because there's only one truth. And so, when I've watched, including when I was a defense lawyer, when I watched, clients who got themselves into horrible predicaments, a lot of times those were people who were trying to tell lots of different stories, and it usually ends up coming back to bite them. And occasionally I would have to deal with a lawyer on the other side who engaged in that kind of conduct, and it usually came back to bite them. So, if you're consistent, number one, it's a lot simpler. Number two, it's the right thing to do. And number three, I think it earns you respect over time, which then means you can be believed at times when it really matters. And I think telling the truth is not just in the long run the best interest for individuals. I think it's in the long run best interest for organizations as well, and that's part of what we've tried to stay focused on at the Bureau in calling out threats. Often when in certain quarters it can be unpopular. The rule of law piece is related in that to me, rule of law is you don't have different rules for wealthy and powerful versus poor and powerless. The rule of law is one rule of law, nobody's above the law, and it applies equally to everybody. And the opposite of that is what you see in authoritarian governments, where there is no law other than just whoever has power and might makes right.
What advice do you have for lawyers like the people in this room who want to feel proud of what they do?
Find a way to give back. I have managed to find a way that works for me, and our workforce has managed to find a way that works for them. But criminal justice and law enforcement are not the only way to do it, but I really do believe that it's not just an obligation that people have where, it's the old thing about to those to whom much is given, much is expected. I'm not suggesting that everybody here didn't earn everything they got, but I think there is something to be said for an obligation to give back, to help others less fortunate. And that can be done in all sorts of different ways. It doesn't necessarily involve coming to work for the government, although I would argue you should come work for the government. But I do think there is, and I've seen it over and over again, there's a level of staying power of the fulfillment that you get from putting service over self. And I'm reflecting just recently on a story involving one of our offices where there was a little girl named Olivia Hall who was 7 or 8 years old. She had a very aggressive terminal form of brain cancer. And through an equivalent of the Make-A-Wish Foundation, since she was tiny, all she ever wanted to do was work for the FBI. And so the office where she lived found out about this, and they kind of took her under their wing, made her an honorary agent. She got to, arrest, the mascot who was trying to steal the guitar at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or something, and then they brought her to Quantico. We stood up a full graduation for it, everything else. Along the way, she came to visit me, and I'll never forget, she walked into the director's conference room, and she's wearing this FBI t-shirt, it's like hanging down below her knees, and she walks into the conference room, and I'm not exaggerating, and the first thing that happens is she goes, and I'm thinking, whoa, I bet nobody's ever come through the FBI director's conference room that way before. And then my second thought was, somewhere right now, J. Edgar Hoover is spinning in his grave. But so we had a great conversation. We took a picture. She looked up at me at the end of the conversation and said, hey, can we take a goofy picture? Now, I should context, she had a very active social media presence. So I look over at our press people who are like panicked, like now what, And so I said, well, Olivia, what do you have in mind? And she said, we could both do what I did when I came in your conference room. And I said, you got any other ideas? And she said, well, what if we both went like this? I said, I'm a lot more comfortable with that one. Anyway, and she gave me this, one of those bracelets, that had her name on it, and she died, maybe a couple months later, but for a solid year, I couldn't take off that bracelet, because every time I looked at it, it kind of reminded me why we do what we do, and people talk about our reputation. I guess my point is, I care about our reputation with people like her, not what somebody's screaming about on the internet. And I think that's one of the beauties of working in this line of work is, you get to do things that have that kind of impact on people like her.
So let me follow up on that with this last question, which is that your father and grandfather were both singularly accomplished lawyers. Did you learn lessons from them that affected your sense of what a fully realized legal career as well as a fully realized personal life might look like?
Well, they would probably both say I didn't learn as much as I should have, but I guess, well, first clarification, as to my grandfather, he died when I was in middle school. I do have very clear memories of him, but they're memories as a young boy, and I remember how much he cared about family, and I remember times he explained certain things to me, and things like that. Later in my career, knowing how important his career was and his dedication to the profession was, I've certainly been very interested in learning more about what he was like as a lawyer, and certain things I think I've carried on from them, ranging from the importance of using simple, clear, plain language rather than convoluted, complicated language, all the way to the value of taking a short nap in your office when you need to refuel. As to my dad, more lessons than I can count. The ones that I think of first, kind of clarity about right and wrong, honesty, and by honesty, I mean honesty in a couple senses, both honesty in terms of telling the truth, as we've talked about. I have a vivid memory of being, I think, maybe 12 and change, which is part of the story. We went to some museum or something, and the fare, the ticket price was cheaper if you were under 12. And at the time, I was 12 in like 2 days. And so he was getting ready to pay the more expensive price. And I said, but Dad, that seems silly. I just turned 12. And he said, well, are you under 12? And I said, well, no, but I mean, it's like 2 days. He said, are you under 12 or not under 12? And I said, well, He said, you're 2 days past 12, so we're paying the price for the 12-year-old. And so then I went and complained to my mom, who said, that's the way your father is, and it's one of the things I love most about him. But honesty also in a different sense, which is sort of intellectual honesty. Dinner conversations typically would often involve arguments, and he taught the value of counter arguments and sort of trying to understand the other point of view. You could almost count on whatever side you took, he would take the other side just to show you there was another side. So I think that, was very valuable. And then I think some of the things I've said tonight about serving others and giving back, he has done it in different ways through his life, but the importance of recognizing that there are others less fortunate and trying to find ways to give back has always been central to his and really to both my parents' identity, and that certainly had an impact. And then last, I would say the importance of a good sense of humor. It doesn't mean I think all of his puns are any good, but in general, the importance of a good sense of humor.
So for me, it's hard for me to imagine a set of comments that are more exemplary of what the Robinson series was designed to elicit from somebody of enormous accomplishment. And your character shines through from every comment you've made all night. And I think, I can't think of any way to conclude except a way that is, I think, driven by an imperative, which is, thank you very much, Dr. Kiernan.